I will never forget that sound. It was dry, brutal, like something deep inside of me had just snapped right along with the silence of the house. I hit the bathroom floor hard, my body twisted, my back pressed against the freezing cold tile. I tried to move, but the sharp pain in my hips stole the air right out of my lungs. The towel had fallen to the side, the water was still running, and I could only stare at the ceiling, hoping time would pass quickly or that someone would hear my screams. I called my children one by one. 5 numbers, 5 long rings that sounded empty and indifferent. No one answered. No one. Not even a text message, a call back, a single word. Just the echo of the phone and my breathing becoming more and more ragged. Minutes passed, then hours. The floor was so cold it felt like it was hugging me. The pain turned into fear, and the fear into a sadness that looks like nothing else in this world. I thought about each of them, about how I had raised them alone since I was 34, when their father died. 5 mouths to feed, 5 uniforms to wash, 5 reasons to keep breathing. And yet, there I was, at 68 years old, all alone, staring at a white ceiling that wouldn't answer me back. But before I continue, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and that you enjoy my stories. Comment down below which city you are watching us from. Now let's continue. I started talking to myself, just to keep from going crazy. Easy, Martha, I repeated to myself. This will pass. You are going to get out of here. But the clock on the wall didn't lie. It had already been 3 hours. My body was going numb, and my fingers were trembling. In the midst of that desperation, I remembered the neighbor from the upstairs apartment. Daniel, a man in his 50s, quiet, kind. I barely knew him. We would pass each other in the elevator, and he would always greet me with a, "Good morning, Mrs. Higgins." I never imagined that everyday greeting would become my salvation. With great difficulty, I dragged myself over to the phone that had fallen on the floor. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. With numb fingers, I dialed his number. He took a while to answer. "Hello?" His voice sounded surprised. "Daniel, it's Martha from 2B, I said with a thread of a voice. "I fell. I can't get up." Silence. Then the sound of hurried footsteps. "Don't move. I'm coming right now." It took less than a minute. He banged on the door hard, and when I heard his voice on the other side, I started to cry. "Easy, Mrs. Higgins. I'm here." He managed to open the door with the help of the building super. When he saw me on the floor, he knelt down without thinking. My God. How long have you been like this? 3 hours, I whispered. He covered me with a dry towel, and his hands, warm and steady, gave me a calm that my children no longer knew how to give me. "We're going to the hospital," he said decisively. "I won't leave you alone." In that moment, I understood that sometimes help doesn't come from blood, but from the soul of a stranger. He lifted me carefully, covered me with his jacket, and took me to his car. The ride was long, but in his silence, there was more compassion than in all the empty words I had heard from my children in years. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed what I feared: a slight fracture in the hip and a blow to the back. Nothing grave, but enough to leave me bedridden for weeks. Daniel stayed with me until they got me settled in a room. He didn't ask about my children. He didn't ask for explanations. He just sat next to the bed, with that calm of someone who understands another's pain without needing to speak. "I appreciate you so much," I told him. "Don't thank me," he replied. "Anyone would do the same." I looked him in the eyes and knew that wasn't true. Not just anyone would do it, not even my own children. That night, while the IV dripped and the hospital lights flickered, I closed my eyes and thought about how ironic it all was. To have given my life for 5 people who didn't even answer the phone, and to be saved by a man who barely knew my name. I didn't know it yet, but that accident wasn't a tragedy. It was a warning, a call from life to remind me that sometimes true bonds aren't inherited. They are found. The sound of the hospital monitor woke me up, a constant, monotonous beep, as if reminding me that I was still alive. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The white ceiling, the smell of disinfectant, the cold light filtering through the blinds. Everything felt foreign, but then I saw him, sitting by the bed, asleep in a chair, was Daniel. His head bowed, arms crossed, and that peaceful look that only people who do good without seeking anything in return have. I stared at him for a long time. He was a simple man, face weathered by work, with hair starting to gray at the temples. He wore a gray jacket and worn-out jeans. He had no rings, no expensive watches, nor the empty gaze of someone living in a rush. He had something more valuable: humanity. When I opened my eyes fully, he woke up with a start. "Mrs. Higgins, how are you feeling?" he asked immediately, coming closer. "Better, thanks to you." He smiled, relieved. "The doctor said it was lucky you called me in time. A little longer, and the hypothermia would have done some real damage." I tried to sit up, but the pain in my hips stopped me. Daniel rushed to adjust the pillow behind me. "Easy, don't move too much. I brought you some water." He took a cup from the nightstand and offered it to me. I watched him with a mix of gratitude and shame. "You didn't have to stay," I told him. "I couldn't leave." His tone was serene but firm. "I wouldn't leave my mother alone if something happened to her, but I am not your mother." "No," he replied, "but you could be." His words hit me harder than the fall. I felt a lump in my throat. It had been years since anyone spoke to me with that tenderness, not even my own children. For the rest of the day, Daniel stayed by my side. He accompanied me while the doctors did their rounds, while the nurse changed the IV, while the clock marked the slow hours of the hospital. He told me he lived alone in the upstairs apartment and worked as a maintenance technician at a school. "I have no family," he said naturally. "My parents died years ago, and I never married." "And no one is waiting for you at home?" "Just my dog, Bruno." He smiled with a hint of sadness. "But he understands." I understood too. At that age, loneliness becomes a silent shadow that one learns to ignore, until one day you notice it sitting at the same table. Daniel and I shared that shadow. At lunchtime, a nurse came in with a tray: chicken, rice, lukewarm soup. I wasn't hungry, but Daniel insisted. "Eat a little, Mrs. Higgins. You have to get your strength back." "Are you always this bossy?" I asked, trying to smile. "Only with people I care about." I didn't know how to respond, so I obeyed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone actually worried about me. While I ate, my mind traveled back to the years when my children were small. I remembered running from one side to the other, cooking with one hand and fixing backpacks with the other. I remembered the sleepless nights, the exhaustion, the fear of not being able to give them enough. And now, thinking about it, it hurt to realize that all my efforts weren't enough to teach them the most basic thing: gratitude. "Will your children come to see you?" Daniel asked cautiously. I swallowed hard. "I don't know. I called them before you arrived. None of them answered." "Maybe they didn't find out." "They'll find out. But they won't come out of affection, Daniel." He looked at me, not knowing what to say. His silence was a gesture of respect, not discomfort. There was something in his gaze that calmed me, that silent understanding that only those who also know abandonment possess. When evening fell, the sun filtered through the hospital window, dyeing the room a melancholic gold. Daniel got up to leave. "I'm going to leave you my number, in case you need anything." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and left it on the table. "And don't worry, I'll stop by early tomorrow to see you." "You don't have to do that." "I know, but I want to." I was left alone, watching the door close behind him, and suddenly I realized something that shook me. That man, almost a stranger, had done in a single day what my 5 children hadn't done in years. He listened to me, he took care of me, and he treated me with dignity. That night, when the hallway lights went out, I closed my eyes and prayed. I didn't ask for my children. I asked for Daniel, for his kindness, for his tired heart, for being the hand that lifted me when mine could no longer hold on. In the silence of the early morning, among the sounds of the machines, I thought that maybe God doesn't always send angels with wings. Sometimes he sends them with a tired voice, workers' hands, and a willing heart. And in that thought, for the first time in a long time, I was able to sleep in peace. The third day in the hospital dawned gray. The sky, covered in clouds, seemed to reflect my state of mind. Daniel had stopped by early. As promised, he brought flowers from the building's garden. They weren't many, barely 3 daisies, but they seemed more beautiful to me than any store-bought bouquet. "So you don't feel lonely," he told me, leaving them in a plastic cup. I smiled at him, although inside I knew that as soon as he left, loneliness would occupy its seat again. After breakfast, the phone rang. For a second, my heart raced. I thought it was one of my children, worried, regretful, with a trembling voice. I answered with hope. "Hello? Mom, they told me you fell." It was the voice of Linda, my eldest daughter. Her tone didn't sound worried, but tired, impatient. "Yes, honey, I'm in the hospital, but I'm feeling better now." "And why didn't you call me sooner?" she retorted. "I found out through the neighbors' group chat." "I called you, Linda. I called you. I called everyone." No one answered. Silence. "Oh, well, it's just that we were busy. You know, work, the kids, life." Her phrase was like a knife disguised as an excuse. I tried to change the subject. "Don't worry. It wasn't serious. A bump on the hip, but they're taking good care of me." She sighed on the other end. "Mom, since I have you on the line, I wanted to ask you something." My chest tightened. "What is it?" "Do you still have those savings in the bank account? The ones Dad left when he died?" For an instant, I thought I had heard wrong. "That is what you wanted to know?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Don't get mad, Mom. It's just that if you have them, you could help Thomas with the down payment on his house." I had to close my eyes not to cry. The conversation wasn't about my fall. It was about money, like always. "Linda," I said slowly, "I can't talk about that right now. I'm tired." "Well, think about what I told you." She responded without emotion. "Call me when you get out of the hospital." And she hung up. I stared at the phone for a long time. I felt the walls shrinking, the air becoming heavy. It wasn't just disappointment. It was confirmation. My children no longer saw me as a mother, only as a bank account with a name. Mid-afternoon, another call. This time it was Robert, my second son. "Mom, I heard you're admitted. What happened now?" He said it with a rushed tone. "What happened now?" As if getting sick at 68 was a whim. "I fell in the bathroom, son." "I've told you 1,000 times. You should sell that old house and move to a more comfortable place." "It is my home, Robert. We built it with your father." "Yes, but you can't live alone anymore. And if you sold, with that money, you could help us all a little." I swallowed hard. "Help you?" "Of course, Mom. It makes no sense for you to stay there alone, clinging to memories." That word, memories, hurt more than any physical blow. To them, my entire life was just that, an obstacle full of the past. I cut the call with a broken voice. When Daniel came in to see me, I tried to fake normalcy, but my eyes gave me away. "Did your children say something to you?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes. They wanted to know if I still have money." He lowered his head. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, Daniel. It's not your fault I raised them so poorly." During the afternoon, no other calls came, just the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the murmurs of nurses, and my mind repeating a question. At what moment does a child's love turn off? Because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens with daily indifference, with the silences, with the "I'll call you later," with the distance disguised as being busy. I closed my eyes and remembered when they were children. Robert coming home running from school with torn pants, and me scolding him between laughs. Linda helping me cook, even though she made more of a mess than food. The twins, Michael and David, sleeping in my arms while I sang softly. And the little one, Sarah, my light, my last daughter, the one who called me pretty mommy, even at 15. Where were those children now? At what moment did they stop needing me? Night fell, and with it, exhaustion. Daniel returned with a cup of hot tea. "You didn't have to come again," I told him. "I couldn't sleep knowing you were here alone." He sat beside me without speaking. The silence this time didn't hurt. It was a shared silence of respect and company. "You know, Daniel," I said after a while, "when you raise children, you believe you are sowing love, but sometimes what you sow is dependency, selfishness, or habit. Maybe they won't know what they have until they lose it, or maybe they already lost it," I whispered. That night, while the hospital slept, I decided something I would never have dared to think before. I wouldn't beg for affection anymore. I wouldn't call anymore. I wouldn't wait anymore. I didn't know it yet, but that thought would be the beginning of my redemption, because love, when it isn't returned, doesn't die. It transforms into dignity. I closed my eyes with an aching heart, but for the first time, wide awake. 5 days passed, 5 identical sunrises with the same hospital smell, the same hallway noise, and the same hole in my heart. Daniel kept coming every morning. He brought me muffins, a thermos with coffee, and sometimes just his silence. That kind silence, which held me up more than any word. That morning, while I was packing my things for discharge, the nurse poked her head through the door. "Mrs. Higgins," she said, "you have visitors?" For an instant, I felt a knot in my throat. Would it be them, my children? I fixed my hair, took a deep breath, and replied, "Let them in, please." The door opened, and there they were. 5 faces that were once my life. Linda, the eldest, with her dyed blonde hair and her expensive purse hanging from her arm. Robert, in a suit, with his phone in hand and a rushed expression. The twins, Michael and David, identical, serious, impatient. And Sarah, the youngest, with dark sunglasses and that expression that mixed shame and pity. For a second, I wanted to cry, but I held back. I didn't want them to see me weak. They had already seen me vulnerable too many times. "Mom," Linda said with a forced tone, "you gave us such a scare." "Yeah, Mom," Robert added, putting away his phone. "You should be more careful." "It was an accident," I replied. "It can happen to anyone." "That's exactly why," Michael interrupted. "You shouldn't keep living alone." "It's dangerous," David added. "You have to sell that house." Sarah, in silence, looked down. "Sell my house?" I asked calmly. "Of course, Mom," Linda said, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "It's big, old, and you can't maintain it anymore." "Besides," Robert added, "with the money, you could help us all a little." That phrase drove into my chest like a thorn. Help us. Not live better, not take care of you, not be close to you. Help them. I looked at each one of them, at those 5 adults who one day were my babies, my sleepless nights, my reason for existing, and I felt a mix of sadness and clarity. It was as if suddenly the blindfold fell from my eyes. They didn't come for me. They came for what they believed was mine. "And what if I don't want to sell it?" I asked. Linda sighed, annoyed. "Mom, don't be stubborn. We're doing it for your own good, for my good," I repeated slowly. "I understand." Robert stood up, walked around the room as if it were his office. "We could invest that money, insure you a pension, a comfortable place." "And you would manage everything, right?" I asked. He smiled without noticing. "Well, yes, it would be the most practical." I didn't answer. I just observed them. Their elegant clothes, their watches, their gestures of impatience. Not a hug, not a tear, not a flower. Just cold, measured, calculated words. Daniel was in the hallway. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, watching through the half-open door. His eyes crossed with mine, and I understood that nothing needed to be said. He knew exactly what was happening. "Mom," Linda said finally with a sweet voice, "don't get like this. We know you're tired. If you want, we'll take care of everything." "No," I replied firmly. 5 pairs of eyes looked at me in surprise. "What do you mean, no?" Robert asked. "I am not going to sell my house, and I don't need anyone to take care of anything." Michael huffed, crossing his arms. "And what are you going to do, Mom? Live alone until you fall again? If that's how it is, it'll be my decision. But you can't go on like this, Linda shouted, losing patience. You have no one. I smiled. You're wrong. I do have someone. There was an uncomfortable silence. Linda furrowed her brow. Who? I looked toward the door. Someone who helped me when you didn't. The silence became denser. Robert adjusted his tie. Are you referring to that neighbor, that Daniel guy? Yes. And now you trust a stranger more than your own children? Sarah asked, the only one who sounded truly hurt. It's not that I trust more, I replied with a serene voice. It's that he was there when I needed you. No one said anything. The twins looked at each other uncomfortably. Linda stood up abruptly. Mom, we don't want to argue. We are just trying to help you. I know, I replied, watching them calmly. And that's why I want to give you something. I slowly took my handbag out of the drawer, the same bag that accompanied me all my life, with the worn leather and frayed seams. I put it on the bed. Everything is in there, I said, looking at them one by one. What you are looking for so badly. Linda arched an eyebrow. In there? What do you mean? Open it, I replied with a faint smile. It's yours. Robert was the first to approach. He unzipped it quickly, like someone opening a chest full of gold. The others crowded around. I saw their expectant faces, their impatient hands, and then silence. A silence so heavy it filled the entire room. I watched them stand motionless, unable to say a word. Linda covered her mouth with her hand. Robert took a step back. Michael lowered his head. Sarah let out a trembling sigh. I said nothing. I just watched them. I knew exactly what they had found, but I wasn't going to tell them yet. Not yet. Because sometimes silence can also be a lesson. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. My 5 children looked at the open bag with faces unhinged, as if they had just seen a ghost. Linda was the first to break the quiet. What is this, Mom? She asked, her voice cracking. I didn't answer. I just observed them, savoring that moment in which time, finally, was returning to them everything they had done to me. But before continuing, I want to extend a very special invitation. Tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Hit like if you are moved by what you are hearing, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. Now let's continue. Inside the bag, there was no money, no jewelry, no keys to any property. There were only 5 paper envelopes, sealed and with names handwritten on them. One for each of my children. The shaky handwriting was mine. I knew it by the way the ink slid at the end of each word, as if each stroke had cost a tear. Open them, I said quietly. Linda was the first. She tore the envelope with impatience, not imagining what she was going to find. She pulled out a folded sheet and began to read out loud. Her face changed as the lines advanced. She went from indifference to astonishment, and from astonishment to tears. My daughter, when you were little, you told me I was your hero. I never forgot that. What you forgot was that heroes get tired too. You swore that when you grew up, you would take care of me. I don't expect that anymore. But I did want you to know that, even with everything you did to me, I still love you. Because a mother doesn't forget, but she learns to be silent. Linda folded the letter slowly and brought it to her chest. For the first time in years, I saw her truly cry. Her tears fell onto the white hospital floor, and each one of them was a tiny piece of the girl she once was. Robert opened his clumsily. His hands were shaking. Son, I taught you that respect isn't bought with money, but with actions. And you, without realizing it, treated me like a burden. Your silence hurt me more than any word. If one day you have children, I hope you learn to listen to them when they tell you they need you. I did that with you, and you weren't there. Robert looked down. His phone rang inside his pocket, but he didn't answer it. For the first time, he let it ring. The twins, Michael and David, looked at each other before opening theirs. They were identical, but that afternoon they looked completely different. One wept in silence, the other clenched his fists in helplessness. My sons, you always had each other, but I had no one. When your father died, I worked nights so you could study. I remember one early morning I came home so tired I fell asleep at the table, head on your books. And when I woke up, I realized neither of you had covered me with a blanket. That night, I understood that love not taught by example is extinguished by habit. Sarah, the youngest, held her envelope without daring to open it. Do it, honey, I told her tenderly. I wrote it for you, too. Her fingers trembled as she tore the paper. My little one, you were my hope. You hugged me even when your brothers made me cry. But you grew up and joined them. I don't blame you. Attitudes are contagious, but so is indifference. If life ever makes you a mother, remember there is no pain greater than an unanswered call. When she finished reading, Sarah stood up, sobbing. Mom, forgive me, she said through tears. No, I replied, caressing her face. I don't need forgiveness. I just needed you to understand. For several minutes, no one spoke. Only the sobs were heard and the distant sound of footsteps in the hall. The nurse, who had walked in unintentionally, stopped at the door, eyes misty. Then Robert, still with the letter in his hand, asked, And the money, Mom? Where is it? I looked up. Ah, yes, that. I put my hand in the bag and pulled out one last envelope, thicker than the rest. It was sealed with red wax. This one is for everyone, I said. Open it together. They did. And what they found inside wasn't money or bank documents. It was a copy of a notarized deed. Robert read it out loud, but his voice broke before reaching the end. The document declared that my house, my savings, and everything I had in my name had been transferred to another person, Daniel Herrera, my neighbor. The silence returned, but this time it was different. A mix of disbelief and shame filled the room. What did you do, Mom? Linda whispered, pale. What I had to do, I replied. I left everything to the only one who was there when you weren't. You can't do that, Robert shouted. That house is our inheritance. No, I said firmly. Inheritance isn't claimed, it's earned. And with that, I lowered my gaze and closed my eyes. I didn't need to say more. They had already understood. The silence after my last sentence was so long I could hear my own heart beating. My children looked at me with a mix of astonishment, fury, and something else. Fear. Fear of losing what they always believed was theirs. Robert was the first to react. He slammed his fist on the table. This is crazy, Mom. You can't leave everything to a stranger. He isn't a stranger, I replied calmly. He is the man who picked me up off the floor when you didn't answer my calls. Linda stood up abruptly from the chair. Are you hearing yourself? You're punishing us for the one time we didn't answer the phone. One time, I repeated with a sad smile. Just one time, Linda. I looked her in the eyes. Do you know how many times I waited for your calls on Sundays? How many times I cooked your favorite dish thinking you would come? She lowered her head. Michael tried to intervene. Mom, we understand you're hurt, but you can't make decisions like this. I already made them, I said. Sarah, the youngest, was crying in silence. You didn't do this for revenge, did you? She asked with a trembling voice. No, honey. I did it for justice. No one spoke for a good while. Robert walked from one side to the other like a caged lion. I'm going to speak with a lawyer, he said beside himself. This cannot be legal. It is totally legal, I replied. I already verified it, and it is signed, sealed, and registered. Mom, Linda screamed, you're leaving us with nothing. I leave you everything you left me, silence and distance. Linda pressed her lips together, holding back tears. Michael and David looked at each other, not knowing which side to take. And Sarah, the smallest, slowly approached my bed. Mom, she whispered, are you really going to do it? I took her hand. I already did, honey. In that moment, the door opened softly. It was Daniel. He carried a bag of fruit and a bouquet of small flowers in his hands. Upon seeing the scene, he stopped, uncomfortable. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. "It's okay, Daniel," I said with a serenity that contrasted with the tension in the air. "We were just talking about you." My children's faces turned toward him with a mix of contempt and bewilderment. Robert looked him up and down. "So you are the famous Daniel?" "Yes, sir," he replied with humility. "And I'm not famous, just a neighbor." "A neighbor who took advantage of my mother?" Robert retorted with a venomous tone. Daniel took a step back, visibly uncomfortable, but I spoke before he could defend himself. "Enough! No one took advantage of me." My voice rumbled in the room with a strength that surprised everyone, even me. Daniel asked for nothing, not a dime, not a promise. He was just there. He did what you didn't do. He treated me like a person, not like a burden. Linda furrowed her brow. "And that gives you the right to leave him everything?" "Yes," I replied without hesitating, "because love isn't measured in blood, but in acts. Because he who picks you up from the ground deserves more than he who watches you fall." Robert huffed, powerless. "Do you know what people will say, Mom?" "I don't care," I replied. "People didn't call me when I was lying on the bathroom floor." Michael ran his hands over his face. "This is crazy," he repeated. "No, son," I said softly. "What was crazy was expecting love from those who only saw me as a burden." Another silence fell, the kind of silence that cuts the air, that forces you to look inward. Sarah broke down crying and hugged my arm. "Forgive me, Mom." "You are already forgiven, honey." "And him?" she said, pointing to Daniel. "What is he going to do with all that?" Daniel stepped forward, nervous. "I don't want anything, Mrs. Higgins. I only wanted to help you." "I know," I replied. "But I want you to accept it because you earned it. Not with favors, but with humanity." My children stayed silent. They didn't know whether to scream or shut up. Pride kept them standing, but their eyes said what their mouths couldn't. Guilt. I settled into the bed and sighed. "I don't hate you," I said slowly, "but I don't need you either." "And what are we supposed to do now?" Robert asked, exhausted. "Learn," I replied. "Learn to love without expecting inheritances, to care without conditions, to be present without asking for a reward." "And you?" Linda asked. "What will you do with your life now?" "Live it," I said with a calm smile. "Maybe for the first time, live it for real." Daniel looked down, moved. "I don't know what to say, Mrs. Higgins." "Don't say anything," I answered him. "Stay by my side for a while." My children gathered their things without looking at me. One by one, they left the room. Only Sarah, the youngest, stopped at the door. "Mom," she said through tears, "can we start over someday?" "Someday, maybe," I replied, "but not today." When the door closed, the silence returned, but it didn't hurt anymore. Daniel sat next to me and took my hand. "Are you sure about what you did?" he asked. "More than ever. They won't understand you." "They don't have to understand me," I replied. "They only have to remember me." That night, while the hospital lay in shadows, I knew I hadn't signed a will. I had signed my freedom, because the true legacy isn't in the goods you leave, but in the lessons you teach before you go. And I, finally, had taught the most important one: that love without gratitude is a broken contract, and that blood without respect is worth nothing. Returning home after the hospital was like coming back to an old body that didn't belong to me anymore. The ambulance stopped in front of the green gate, the one my husband painted with me one summer afternoon, while the kids played on the sidewalk. The sun was going down, and the front of the house seemed smaller, quieter, as if it had also aged in my absence. The medic helped me down slowly. The air smelled of humidity and dried lavender. When I crossed the threshold, the silence was so deep I thought I heard my own thoughts. The hallway clock kept marking the same hours as always, but now every tick-tock sounded like a question without an answer. Is it worth living when no one is waiting for you? "Shall I help you with the bags?" Daniel asked with that voice of his that he never raised, as if fearing he might break something inside me. "Sure, son. Put them in the dining room." I watched him as he entered. His steps were careful, almost reverent. He looked at the portraits on the walls like someone walking through an ancient museum. There they were: Linda with her braids at school, Robert in his soccer uniform, the twins holding a birthday cake, and Sarah hugging her father on her first day of classes. 5 lives hanging on the wall, but none in my present. Daniel left the bags on the table and turned toward me. It must be hard coming back here alone. It was at first, I answered him, but today, not so much. He nodded without saying more. We spent a good part of the day cleaning, dusting off memories. I showed him where I kept the cups, the tablecloths, the porcelain plates that were only used at Christmas. Every object had a story. And while I spoke, I realized that for years I hadn't shared my voice with someone for so long. Daniel listened with attention, sometimes smiling, sometimes looking at me with a compassion so clean it hurt. When the clock struck 6, he made coffee. The aroma filled the house, mixing with the smell of old wood and disturbed dust. We sat face to face at the same table where I used to have dinner with my children. Now there were just 2 cups, 2 silences, 2 broken lives trying to fit together. "Thank you for staying," I told him, looking at the steam from the coffee. "Thank you for letting me in," he replied. "Not everyone would." "Not everyone deserves it," he added with a calm that went right through me. That phrase stuck with me. Not everyone deserves it, because for many years I had believed that love was an obligation, that affection should be given without measure, even if it hurt. Daniel was teaching me the opposite, that kindness must also be protected, that the soul cannot keep giving without receiving. That night, fairly late, we went out to the porch. The fresh air smelled of wet earth. The garden was overgrown, but some blue hydrangeas were still blooming. My husband used to say hydrangeas are grateful flowers because they give beauty even to those who forget them. I looked at them with tenderness. "My husband planted those over 20 years ago," I told him. He said they were the heart of the house. Daniel crouched down and touched one of them carefully. "Then your house is still beating." We stood in silence. The fireflies lit up among the bushes, and in some distant corner a dog barked. The silence, which before weighed on me like a stone, now felt like a warm coat. Over the following days, Daniel began spending more time there. He came early to bring bread from the market, helped me water the plants, and fix the dining room lamp that had been flickering for years. The house began to change, not in looks, but in soul. The air no longer smelled of abandonment, but of freshly baked bread and hope. I, in turn, felt alive again. I cooked again, listened to music, combed my hair with care. One afternoon, I even put on the blue dress I had kept since my 40th anniversary with my husband. Daniel looked at me surprised. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Higgins." "Thank you," I answered, laughing. It was time to dust off the woman who lived inside here. He offered me his arm in a gesture that reminded me of the old days. We walked through the garden like 2 ghosts who had decided to come back to life. But peace never comes without a test. One morning, the phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Mom, can we talk?" I closed my eyes, and for an instant the past returned with force. The little girl who hugged me on rainy nights, the teenager who told me, "Don't cry, Mommy, everything will be okay." I swallowed hard. "Of course, honey, you can always talk to me." "I want to see you," she said. "I want to ask for your forgiveness." I hung up the phone and stood in silence. Daniel, who was sweeping the porch, looked at me from the door. "Everything okay?" "My daughter," I said with a thread of a voice. "She wants to come see me." He smiled, and his eyes filled with a sweetness that did me good. "Then it's time to open the windows, Mrs. Higgins. Let the light in." That afternoon, I prepared the house as if it were Christmas. I took out the old tablecloths, lit a candle in the dining room, cooked the apple pie that Sarah loved as a child. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the mix of fear and hope. When I heard the doorbell, I felt my heart stop. I opened the door slowly. There was my daughter, thinner, eyes swollen from crying. She looked at me for a few seconds without saying anything, and then threw herself into my arms. Mom, forgive me, please. I hugged her as tight as my bones allowed. You are already forgiven, honey. I stroked her hair. You don't know how long I waited for this moment. We sat at the table, and for a long while we didn't talk about anything. We just ate, cried, and smiled every now and then. Sometimes love doesn't need words, just presence. When we finished, she sighed. The others are furious with you, she said shyly. Robert wants to sue you. I smiled serenely. I know, but I'm not on their side, Mom. I got tired of living with resentment. I took her hand. You did good. Resentment is a poison you drink in slow sips. Before leaving, Sarah looked around. This house feels different. Because now it has life, honey, I told her. There are no screams or reproaches anymore, just silence. She smiled. A nice silence. Exactly. A silence that doesn't hurt. Daniel entered right at that moment, hands stained with garden soil. Sarah looked at him with curiosity. You are Daniel, right? Yes, ma'am, he replied nervously. Thank you for taking care of my mom. He lowered his gaze. I didn't take care of her. I just gave her back what the world took from her. Attention. Sarah stayed quiet for a few seconds, and then, with a shy smile, thanked him again before leaving. After closing the door, Daniel sat across from me. She was brave, you know, he said. Opening your heart after so much damage isn't easy. I'm not brave, I answered him. I just understood that life gets short when you hold grudges. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, listening to the murmur of the wind against the windows, thinking about my children, about Daniel, about everything lived. And I understood something I had never understood before. Love doesn't disappear, it transforms. Some move away, others arrive, but the heart always finds a way to keep beating. The following days were calm. Daniel started fixing the garden fence, and I started writing again in my old brown notebook. There, between crooked sentences and ink stains, I left small fragments of what I had learned. One morning I wrote, "Silence is not loneliness. It is the voice of the soul when finally no one interrupts it." Sometimes I sat in front of the window to watch the leaves fall, and I felt gratitude for everything, even for the pain, because without it, I wouldn't have reached that moment. One afternoon, Daniel brought me an envelope. It arrived in the mail, he said. It was from Robert. Inside, there was only one sheet. Mom, I can't understand you, but I can't hate you either. I suppose that is a start. Robert, I smiled. It was little, but enough. That night, while Daniel prepared tea, I opened a new page in my notebook and wrote slowly, with firm handwriting, "The house of silences is no longer alone. Now peace lives here, and where there is peace, there is love." I closed the notebook and put it next to my husband's photo. Then I looked at Daniel, who was smiling without realizing it, and I thought that maybe life hadn't robbed me of anything. It had only made me wait a little longer to return what I deserved, a quiet love. Winters have always seemed like a perfect metaphor for the soul. Everything seems asleep, but beneath the cold, life keeps beating. That winter was like that, silent, gray, but full of new heartbeats. Some months have passed since I returned from the hospital. Daniel is still here. He comes every morning with a smile and hot bread, and although he never says it, I know he does it to ensure I am still breathing. I make him coffee. He tells me stories of his youth, and sometimes, without realizing it, we laugh like two old friends sharing the secret of staying alive. The house has changed. The laughter is heard again, the flowers open again, and the air doesn't weigh so much anymore. Even my children's portraits seem less sad, as if they too were trying to forgive themselves from those walls. But I know, even if no one says it, that my body is already tired. There are nights when the pain in my bones wakes me up, and memories come with such clarity that it's hard to distinguish between the lived and the dreamed. It doesn't scare me. I have made peace with the idea of the end, not as a defeat, but as a kind farewell. One rainy afternoon, while Daniel slept in the armchair, I opened my old notebook. I decided to write a letter. Not for my children, nor for the lawyer, not even for Daniel. I wrote it for me, for the woman I was, the one who endured, the one who fell, the one who bent without breaking, the one who many times wished to disappear, but who always for some reason kept breathing. Dear Martha, you did it. Not because you beat anyone, but because you didn't let the pain turn you cruel. You were hurt, forgotten, and humiliated, but you kept loving, and although your own turned their backs on you, you found family in a stranger's heart. That is your victory, not of one who accumulates inheritances, but of one who learns to live without them. I folded the letter and kept it in the notebook. I didn't plan to show it to anyone. It was my way of closing the circle. The days followed their course. Daniel insisted on accompanying me to the doctor, on cooking, on cleaning. I pretended to be stronger than I was. I didn't want to worry him. I had learned to hide pain for many years. Doing it one more time cost me nothing. One morning, while the sun barely sneaked through the curtains, I felt something different. It wasn't pain, it was a deep tiredness, as if my body was asking for rest. I didn't want to alarm Daniel, so I told him I would go rest in the room. He nodded. Rest, Mrs. Higgins. I'll make you tea when you wake up. I smiled. Thank you, son. I closed the bedroom door. The air smelled of jasmine, the same perfume I used when I was young. I sat in front of the mirror and observed my reflection. Face full of wrinkles, eyes still alive. For the first time in a long time, I found myself beautiful. Not for what I saw, but for what I had endured. I took a small wooden box out of the drawer. Inside, I kept a few things. A photo of my husband smiling, a lock of Sarah's hair when she was a child, a ring without a stone, and a small key. That key opened the desk drawer, where I had left envelopes for everyone. 5 letters, 1 for each child, and 1 more for Daniel. I took a breath. Writing them had been harder than leaving them the inheritance. Every word had bled. The letter to my children. My children, if you are reading this, I am gone. I want no tears or reproaches. I want you to listen to me with your heart, not with guilt. I didn't leave you the house because I didn't want to punish you. I did it because I needed to teach you something life never showed you. That love isn't measured by what is received, but by what is given. I already gave you everything. Now it's your turn to learn to give without waiting. I didn't hate you for a single day. I just waited too long for you to return. If you ever feel the world forgets you, think of me and remember that a mother always waits, even when she no longer has a body to do so. I cried rereading it. The tears stained the ink, but it didn't matter. The message was there. Love doesn't need to be intact to be eternal. The letter for Daniel. Daniel, I don't know if I'll be able to thank you in person, so I'm doing it in writing. Thank you for arriving when no one else did. Thank you for treating me with respect when I already felt invisible. You didn't inherit a house, you inherited a story. Take care of it, not as a place, but as a heart that still beats within these walls. If you ever doubt what you did for me, look at the garden. The hydrangeas bloom for you. I folded the letter with trembling hands, put it in the envelope, and sealed it with red wax. Then I lay down. My body felt heavy, but my mind was at peace. I felt the evening air enter through the window, soft, warm, like a caress. I closed my eyes and, for the first time, I didn't think about my children, nor about the pain, nor about time lost. I thought about Daniel's voice saying good morning and the smell of hot bread in the mornings. And so, without fear, I let myself go. The next morning, Daniel found me asleep with a smile. The cup of tea was still steaming on the nightstand, untouched. He touched my hand, but it was already cold. He sat beside me, and for hours, he didn't cry. He just held my hand, as if he could still transmit a little of his warmth to me. When the children arrived, everything was arranged. The lawyer waited for them with the documents and Daniel with the envelopes. The news spread fast, like everything involving money and inheritance. Robert was the first to arrive, face tense. "Where is she?" he asked. "In her room," Daniel replied with a firm voice. "Don't disturb her now." "She is my mother," shouted Robert. "Yes," Daniel replied, "but I was the one who accompanied her when you didn't." Linda arrived shortly after, with dark glasses. Sarah had eyes swollen from crying. Michael and David, in silence. When they saw their mother's body, their pride broke in a single instant. The lawyer, fulfilling the last will, handed them the envelopes. Daniel retired to the garden. He didn't want to witness the reading. He just stayed by the hydrangeas, watching the gray sky starting to clear. Inside each envelope, the letters Martha had written spoke for themselves. Linda fell to her knees reading hers. Robert broke down crying, unable to contain himself. Michael and David hugged for the first time in years, and Sarah, hands trembling, found an additional note inside her letter. "My baby girl, when you hug me in your memories, don't think about what you didn't do. Think about what you can still do. Take care of your brothers. Don't allow money to divide you further. And if you ever visit my grave, bring flowers, but also laughter. I don't want weeping. I want life." Daniel entered the house at sunset. Everything was in silence. On the dining room table, an envelope with his name waited for him. He opened it slowly. Inside, besides the letter, was a small key. It was the desk key. He opened the drawer and found something else. A property title with his name and a footnote. "This house is no longer mine, Daniel. Now it is yours. Not so you live in it, but so you keep caring for its soul. Here I left my story, but also yours. Promise me you will keep planting hydrangeas every spring." Daniel cried for the first time in many years. He sat in front of the window and looked at the garden. The flowers looked bluer than ever, as if the sky had come down to rest among the petals. The funeral was simple, as she wanted. No speeches, no expensive wreaths, just a white casket and a bouquet of hydrangeas on the lid. The children arrived together in silence. Daniel remained at the back, head bowed. When the priest finished speaking, Linda approached. "May I?" she said to Daniel. He nodded. She was his mother. Linda placed her hand on the casket and between sobs said, "Forgive us, Mom. We arrived late, but we arrived." Robert added in a low voice, "And thank you for not leaving us with the lie that we were enough." Daniel waited for everyone to leave. Only then did he take a last envelope from his pocket. It was the one Martha had left for that moment. He opened it and read out loud, facing the wind, facing the freshly covered grave. "If you are reading this, Daniel, I want to ask you a favor. Don't let this house become a museum of pain. Fill it with laughter, with flowers, with good people. And when spring arrives, open the windows and let the air in. That will be my way of coming back." Daniel folded the letter and kept it next to his heart. He stood there, watching the sun fall behind the cemetery. The wind moved the leaves, and for an instant, he swore he heard a voice whisper his name. "Thank you." A year later, Martha's house bloomed again. Daniel kept his promise. The hydrangeas grew stronger. Neighbors came to visit him, and sometimes Martha's children too. Sarah helped him paint the walls, Robert brought him bread, and Linda, with time, stayed some days to read to her grandchildren in the garden. They didn't talk about the past. It wasn't necessary. The silence that was once painful was now peace. One afternoon, while Daniel watered the plants, a white butterfly landed on one of the hydrangeas. He smiled, looked at the sky, and said quietly, "I know you're here, Mrs. Higgins." And the wind blew softly, like an answer. Sometimes, life isn't about how much we receive, but how much we are capable of continuing to give even when no one is watching us. Martha left in peace, not with the bitterness of someone forgotten, but with the serenity of someone who understood that love isn't measured by blood, but by gestures. Her children learned late that affection isn't bought with gifts, nor inherited with assets. They learned that a mother's true legacy isn't kept in a will, but in the mark her kindness leaves on the hearts she touched. And Daniel, he is still there, tending the garden, opening the windows, speaking to the air as if he could still hear her. Every spring, The hydrangeas bloom again, and the perfume escaping through the cracks seems to say, I am still here, not with my body, but with everything I was. The time cured what words could not. The house of silences became a refuge of peace, and everyone who enters feels something special, as if Martha's soul were still walking barefoot down the halls. Because in the end, that is what we are. Stories sown in others. Flowers that bloom when the soul learns to forgive. Tell me in the comments which part of this story touched your heart the most. Hit like if you felt Martha left you a life lesson. And subscribe to the channel, because here we remember again and again that true love never dies. It simply learns to bloom in silence.